Every great business starts with one audacious belief. For my guest today, that belief was simple. The internet was going to change everything, and he was going to be the one helping businesses survive that change. That was 25 years ago. That was 2 company exits. He has a national agency, a television show, and I think we can all agree that he was right. Ken, welcome to the Dream Dividend.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and thanks for the intro. You make me seem a lot smarter than I think I am. That I had that type of foresight to predict the future of the internet. But it sounds good on the lead in, man. You
Yeah,
definitely
man.
put me out there. I appreciate it.
Yeah, shit. Well, today we're gonna build something. We're gonna jump in. We're gonna talk about a lot. So let's just jump right into it. So first, Ken, before we do anything else, I want to publicly say thank you. A couple years ago, you stepped up and donated to the football program that I was running at the time. Brought the team pink jerseys for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I believe that was in memory of your mother. You know, that kind of thing tells me everything that I need to know about who a person actually is, because you didn't know me from Adam, right? You didn't know me at all. Your son was with the program, but so thank you,
Yeah,
really, from the bottom of
absolutely.
my heart.
You're welcome. And, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that, I always look at is when, people like yourself are out there trying to do good things for the kids and different programs, and they're putting in a lot of time. Sometimes, it's nice when people that maybe aren't as hands-on can come in and try to contribute in some way. And I thought that was really a good concept. I think, doing something like that to be able to kind of in some way, honor my mom was really kind of cool too. So I appreciated the opportunity, and thank you for bringing it up. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Um, Kids loved them too, by the way. We
The cool thing, all the kids love that stuff.
he looked bold and going through the playoffs. It was fun. So now let's take people back before WebiMax, before the TV show, or really before everything. Here we have a guy who believed that the internet was the future when most businesses didn't even have a website yet. Where does that story actually start for you?
Well, when I was in college, getting out of college was when like email kind of first started. And, to tell you how much of a kind of belief I had or really on that was like, I was like, why would we need this? Like, this just seems like a total waste of time for me to really learn this. And then, got out of college, started working, and started to see how more and more, kind of people, younger people were using the internet, and how much there was the divide between people that were kind of secured in their roles and weren't really able to use the internet. And I had a sales job doing a lot of outside sales, and people were constantly just using the phone. I was always taught to cold call, show up in person, phone, and then started to use email because it started to become a little bit more prevalent. And I noticed right away that, I was in my early to mid 20s out there cold calling against guys that are probably my age today, in their 50s, who were super experienced, and they didn't know how to use email. So I all of a sudden was getting responses from people that were hard to get in touch with, and they were, setting up meetings and everything, and a lot of it was through email. And I realized that at that moment there was kind of this, inflection point, if you will, that there wasn't, really, certain people weren't really tuned into this technology that was like readily available. And it got my mind spinning, and talked about how, hey, how can I leverage this and my kind of sales background into something that could kind of be a business. And that was the first time that I really kind of thought about how I could kind of translate, just what I was seeing in real time into a business.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk me through the first 2 companies. Talk me through, I think the first one was Impact Direct.
Sure. So VendorSeek was actually the first one,
Okay.
and VendorSeek was basically essentially a business that really focused on, being able to connect businesses with potential vendors, the name VendorSeek. So, essentially what we were able to do was people would put in requests for different services they need. We'd get them multiple quotes, and in turn, we would generate revenue by selling those leads to different companies. Where we really kind of saw success was we were able to kind of find services in markets that were kind of new. So, about that time, search engine optimization was something that really kind of came to the forefront, and we were the first company really working and doing marketing in that area. Website design, as you mentioned, a lot of companies didn't even have websites then. So there was this huge rush to really get websites. So we were in a lot of these newer categories, if you will, that were highly active with buyers. And we were able to connect them with people that were, able to provide those type of services. So VendorSeek was really kind of the first opportunity to really be able to put that into the mix, which kind of led into Impact Direct, because Impact Direct was really, we would have scenarios where we would have so much volume for certain leads, specifically in the website design category, that we couldn't actually sell them to enough vendors, because vendors were like, we've gotten 500 leads this month. Our
Too
sales
much.
team
Yeah.
can't keep up. So we
God
were like,
forbid. God
well,
forbid.
yeah, exactly. So we were like, well, what if we had our own little company that just took all the overflow, and then we could try to sell those, so we're just not burning money on, kind of lost revenue. And that kind of spawned, kind of Impact Direct, which really kind of, became kind of a side agency and supported VendorSeek, and, was really something that kind of got me involved in, the agency space, if you will.
Right. So you sold VendorSeek in 2008,
Yep.
which, I mean, believe it or not, my audience demographic is folks in their late 20s, early 30s. So they don't remember this so much like we do. But for those that are our age, right, most people remember that was the start. 2008 was the start of the worst recession in 80 years.
Yep.
Most people, after cashing out in the business that they just spent the last X amount of years building, right, they're going to exit and take a breath. You jumped right into WebiMax. Why?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that was really kind of happened with VendorSeek was, in the early stages, we were kind of small and, kind of trying to figure things out. And I kind of felt that just when we figured things out and we're really kind of taking off, we came in and got acquired. And I felt like somewhat like, okay, like let me kind of ride that momentum and take that immediately to another business, and try to take that type of philosophy and grow things. And literally we got our transaction done, and I think it was about 2 weeks later, right, the bottom fell out of everything. So had we been delayed or there been some issue, that whole dynamic of that deal would have changed. It may not have even ever happened. So
Right.
kind of, from that perspective, I was very, I consider myself very, very fortunate and very lucky that it kind of went that way. And then when, we kind of started up WebiMax, the biggest challenge was we went from having this kind of really fast growing business, and things were clicking, and, everything was really kind of going, full steam ahead, to being back at square one, and, having to try to really restart things. And yeah, I guess I had a little bit of cred on the street, just kind of going through what I had gone through. But I realized, that'll only get you so far. People are looking for real life examples of how you're able to help them in the business you have today. And I would say that coupled with, the big recession that we had there, really kind of made for what was kind of a very slow start for WebiMax. And part of me, probably questioned, was this the right plan? Was this the right idea to really go forth and do this so quickly? Should I have, kicked back for a while, whatever? But so it was a slow start. I can't say that it was like a, boom, I snapped my fingers and everything was really flying.
Right. Well, I mean, look, either way, it takes either tremendous courage or tremendous stubbornness to be able to go with it. It's probably a little bit of both, right?
Probably a little bit of both. You could have said stupidity. Yeah, it probably would have been right too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it was, yeah, I mean, I think, it was just a matter of, wanting to continue to kind of harness that momentum and being able to kind of take it. And it was definitely eye opening because it just kind of grinded to a halt. And, it definitely took, well over a year, going on 2 years before things really started to kind of click. So, it was definitely humbling, and just kind of, brought me back to the notion of, that was like, regardless of kind of how you are, when you take a step back like that, you're a startup again. You've got to build all that brand value. You got to build all those things again. Yes, some of the things you've done in the past can help you, but it's not going to help you enough. Like you've got, and that was probably the biggest kind of turning point for me, was really being like, okay, like, I can't treat this as an extension of the things we did at VendorSeek. I need to treat this as a sole new business. We can say, hey, here's some of the great things we've done, but here's the things we're doing now. And once I kind of got to that point and we were able to kind of start to get some clients on board, that was really the breaking point for us to really be able to see the growth that we were looking for. So it was definitely scary for a while there, because, I thought to myself, hey, maybe, you were lucked out on the one concept, and you don't have what it takes to keep doing it. So no question about it. If you're an entrepreneur, you know there's those moments of doubt, right? There's those moments where you think to yourself, did I make the right decision? Did I do that? Am I doing things right? I think the big thing for entrepreneurs is really kind of having to take that self-reflective look at things and really be able to make that decision around what's holding you back, like, and how do you break that cycle to be able to find your path forward.
Yeah, for sure. So, for listeners who don't know WebiMax, give us the 30 to 60-second pitch.
Sure. So we really started off very, heavy in search engine optimization. It was kind of the in vogue thing there, 2008, 2009. Over time, we really kind of expanded into, really a comprehensive digital marketing agency. So, everything from social media into design. One of the things that really kind of came into the forefront as we got into the COVID timeframe was something called
Mm.
reputation management. There was an immense amount of scrutiny, right, over things that people had done or said in the past. And some of those people had really, it was relatively something minor that, took place years and years ago. And it was kind of brought to the forefront.
Mm.
People were losing jobs, businesses were suffering, and all of these things were kind of happening very, very quickly. And reputation management really became something that, we started to focus on that much more. And, really kind of, I would say from a business perspective, it was a little bit different because, most of the time we work with businesses, and hey, it's always great to see businesses grow, and it's always great to see the stories behind people having success. But this was more personal. These were people that, in large part were good people that, had tweeted something, in 2011 that, at the time was probably, accepted, but in that time frame right then, it was questioned. And
Yeah.
their whole life was turned upside down because of, this moment of, I don't know, maybe lack of compassion, or just maybe lack of awareness, or just maybe even the standards.
Lack of a filter.
Yeah, or even just times have changed, right? Like the things maybe you could say then you can't say now, whatever the case may be. But the thing that was rewarding about it was really being able to have more of a personal connection with people and help them through some of those challenges. Being able to see some of those things when people were really, their lives were being turned upside down by something like that. It was kind of, it was a positive thing that I felt we were able to do. And now, kind of the climate's changed a little bit again, so, and, that's brought on to where we are today, which really, AI is really, everybody's talking about it. And there's a reason why everybody's talking about it, because it's really become so ingrained in parts of our lives, but it's really being ingrained heavily into business, and it's really being ingrained heavily into aspects of marketing. So, all of those things have really kind of, transitioned, just not so much the way we manage things, but just really kind of the dynamic by which we're approaching, things and how we handle our clients.
Yeah, I mean, right. AI has been a buzzword for what, 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
He honestly didn't really buy in until probably 18 months ago. And yeah, I got a lot going on around it that I'm not going to get into the secret sauce. This is about you, not about me.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're being modest, because we talked a little bit before we got on the show, and it sounds like you're doing some really great things. And again, I think one of the pieces that really impresses me, and kind of goes into kind of what we're talking about on the show, is just really, how you were able to kind of, I don't want to say pivot, right, but basically see an opportunity and really, immerse yourself in that, and make yourself, someone that really was able to leverage AI towards your benefit. And I think that's something that, a lot of times people, don't aren't willing to kind of immerse themselves in things to really be able to kind of utilize it. And I think that, your story is a story that I think is a great one, because you're telling me about some of the things that you were able to do without, coding or any type of background like that. And I think that's some really positive stuff. Even
Yeah.
though, I think that's, like, I think it's just, to me, that just shows a level of, kind of entrepreneurship, that drive that you have to be able to learn something that you knew nothing about, and being able to take it into where you're able to really have something that is, business ready, is, you should be proud of yourself for that.
Well, I took me till, first of all, thank you, but took me till 50 years and a triple bypass to figure out that I should do that. Thanks. It's pretty funny. So you have a founder's pledge, right? That says
Yeah.
something that, resonates heavily with me, especially in, I mean, not just today's climate, but like I'd say even the last 20 to 30 years climate. And that is the difference between flourishing and fledging companies. It shows when things aren't going so well. But when there are bumps in the roads, like where did that, well, first of all, what is it? Like I'd like you to explain your founder's pledge, and then where did it come from you for
Yeah,
you?
I mean, I think my pledge is just, to kind of consolidate, is really just that, you know, our focus is always really going to be on helping our clients. And, I've never been someone who tries to kind of stay entirely behind the scenes, and that our clients can have access and talk to me. So many times when we've had situations where there's been bumps in the road, when clients reach out to me directly, a lot of times it's just a miscommunication, something that's extremely fixable. And, I've always thought, even in, when I have situations, which we've all probably encountered, right, where we're working with a business or whatever the case might be, and there's just nobody, right, who's accountable, right? There's nobody who wants to take that problem on. Everybody's like, well, we're going to pass you to this person. Oh, I'm going to pass you to my manager. My manager's going to pass, and nobody really just wants to address it. And so many times I feel like that takes a situation that is, relatively small, and it just really expands it. And what I really try to do and what I really try to take pride in is really getting involved in a situation like that to really identify whatever issues there are and fix them. And, I think it's been really something that's been successful for us because, I think a lot of people run from problems. They don't like to address them. And I also
Or
think,
hide from them.
and when you've got a team of people and you force them to have to deal with some of these things, it puts them in spots that they're uncomfortable with. When they know, hey, Ken's got my back, he's going to come and get involved here and he's going to help me get this fixed. I think it gives them a level of confidence and gives them a level of respect that they know that you're there for them. And that's been something that, again, I really have thought was, a big piece of how I really like to run the business. And, accountability to me is really something that I think rings true. I think too many businesses, people, just try to pass the buck and they never really fix things. And, to me, having a business that people can, look at and say, hey, whatever happened, these guys worked hard to make it right with us and they got us back on track. And that's to me, the value of a good business.
Yeah, right on, right on. As I think I spend my days in ERP implementations, right? So what you just said is like a unplanned segue into kind of like my next comments. ERP gets a bad rap, right? I think
Mhm.
everybody knows it. And the number one reason that those projects fail, it has nothing to do with the software, right? It comes down to the
Yeah.
people that are going to use the system. Even more so, it comes down to culture or change resistance. Does that track with what you see on the digital side as well?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that, people play a big part in the success of all these things. And I think, one of the biggest things that we often see is just being able to gain trust, right? Where a great example, recently, we started to work with a pretty large law firm, very successful, and they'd been working with another company like mine for quite some time, and they'd seen success. And over the past year or so, they've seen kind of some declining success, which I think could be tied to a few different reasons. One was, I think, the biggest, I think, is just there was some reluctance on the client to kind of change and evolve with what's going on in the space, right? There, hey, we've been super successful with this process for all these years. This is our lifeline to revenue. This is what keeps us going. We don't really want to change it. And the reality of it is, well, it's not so much that you want to change it or anybody wants to change it, but everything else that's going on around you is changing. And if you're not going to evolve with that, you're going to find that you're going to continue to get diminishing returns. And, I think one of the earliest conversations I had with them was really, look, I'm not an advocate for just throwing everything out and saying we're starting from scratch. There's still value in some of the things you're doing, but we need to put
Right.
some of these other things in place for you to be able to show growth. And over time, you're going to be able to see the type of ROI that you're looking for. Just give us that chance. Trust us that this is our area of expertise. And I think what really hit home for them was, hey, there's a reason that people utilize attorneys, right? It's because we might know we're right or whatever the situation is, but we don't know all the laws. We don't know the legalities of things. We don't know all that. We have to trust them that that's their area of expertise, that they're going to be able to help guide us through that particular situation, whatever it might be. It's no different in some of the things that we do, right? It's a level of trust and gaining that trust, and goes back to being accountable. So I think you're right. People do play a large part in all these things because a lot of times people can be resistant to some of the things that are the very core towards what could be successful. People and how things are implemented and how things are perceived at the end of the day play a large part in the success of any type of business transaction, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, it's Gallup says that there's 75% of the workforce is disengaged. So, as a business owner, you think about that, you're like, which
A
three out of
lot.
my four people aren't working right now? They're not doing anything. But, you know, kind of since the surgery, right? Look, I'm a A-type personality, right? I'm a coming out the other side of a triple bypass surgery, which I had a couple years ago. Gives you a different perspective on life. Like it really does. Like it really, really does. Especially, and for me, especially considering, that's how my father passed away in 2020. He didn't make it off the table. Granted, he was 84. I was 48. So it was a no-brainer to me. And I didn't have a heart attack or anything. It was just I was in for a checkup and I didn't feel great. I was tired, blah, 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 blah. 6 months later, crackety crack.
Yeah,
So, that it's easy to point the finger at people for not adopting things. But what my experience has been and what I've seen is it's not that they're not adopting, it's that they're not even being asked or included in the conversation, right? So we're in the ERP space, you're in your space. We walk in when the system is being designed, you're typically sitting in a conference room with department heads, VPs, people who haven't been out there doing the job for God
absolutely.
knows how long. And I am always the guy that goes, before we do anything, let's take a walk. All right, let's go talk to the people on the floor so
Sure.
I can understand what their pain points are. And usually people are surprised. Like they're genuinely surprised. I think partially because we're not the only vendor they're looking at, right? They've already been through this with two or three other software publishers. And then here we come and I come with my question. So that's what led me down, one of my business paths, which, we'll talk about at a later date offline. But yeah. So anyway, enough about me. So you built WebiMax to what, over 100 people now?
We were our peak amount of people was around 180 people. Yeah.
100, and you have 8 offices with 4 being international, or 8 US offices, 4 international.
We've had, yes. So we have presence in a lot of different places for sure. And not all the offices are huge offices. Some are kind of, sales offices. But yeah, no, we've been able to, to expand the business and, really kind of take advantage of, the technology that we're using today, right? Things like Zoom and all these things have really made being able to have, a workforce that isn't all in the same place a lot more accessible.
Yeah, it's a good thing they came from COVID.
Yes, that's one good thing that came from COVID. I struggled to use Zoom before COVID, to be honest with you. So, yes,
Yeah, you
yeah,
had to figure it out quick. I mean, I was working
right.
from home since 2015, so it wasn't any different for me. So, with that being the case, what does culture look like at that scale? Because that's typically where a lot of agencies are going to fall apart.
Sure. I mean, I think, the biggest thing today is really just kind of understanding, the landscape of, kind of what people are looking for. And, it kind of goes back to what you just kind of did with your example, within the ERP space, being able to understand the people that are actually doing a lot of the work and really listening to them and, kind of what their requests and needs are and, kind of how they envision the flow to be. There always needs to be, someone making the decisions. There always needs to be someone who, kind of runs the ship, if you will. But, nowadays I think is probably a lot different than when you and I were younger and, businesses were just like, you showed up, this is what you did. You didn't really get a lot of input. I feel like that culture has really shifted. People look for more input. And I think as, being the CEO, one of the things that I've learned is like, yeah, sometimes take some of that feedback, even if you're not 100% on board with it, but say, hey, we're going to try it and let's see how it works. And sometimes it works out great. And sometimes you're like, hey, we tried it, it's not working out. But I think the big goal with business is something I think you and I can relate to very much when it comes to sports and any coaching that we've ever done, right? You got to get buy-in, right? You need buy-in from everybody. Everybody needs to buy into what you're doing. You can't have, you know, three-quarters of your team or your company that don't buy into what that message is and what that goal is. So I think being able to try to create that buy-in is the biggest key, I feel, to really being able to handle that type of culture.
Yeah, agreed. So let's get to the kind of edge of what's happening right now. Uh, you guys just celebrated WebiMax's 17th anniversary, and in the same breath, you announced what?
That we were in the process of going through an acquisition with a very good partner of ours, Vertas. They're a public company based out of India. You know, I think being 17 years in the business over the last couple of years, one of the things that I really kind of looked for was someone that could be a partner that could really kind of help take us to the next level and really brought different aspects to the table that really kind of complemented us and complemented some of the things that we were doing. You know, one of the keys when I kind of looked at it was, I think that, the vision that they really brought was that they wanted me to be part of everything, that they want me to, kind of run the show. And they always kind of say to me, hey, we're here to help enable you to be able to achieve more success. And I think that
Perfect.
that's really been, for me, the perfect fit. And,
For sure.
for us, I think, there's been, I use the word inflection points. There's been over the course of time, there's been different inflection points where I've thought, okay, what is the best path for us forward? And, I think that one of the things that really kind of came into play was, we've talked about AI, we've talked about kind of the changes that are going on within the industry. And, I think sometimes you've got to look at things and say, hey, with so much change, do we have all the internal resource and capabilities to be able to manage this change quickly and be able to stay ahead of the curve? And, that's one of the things by having a partner like Veritas that, we're able to have that resource. We're able to have that back end support. And, one of the things I've said for years is, in any type of business today that's dealing with technology, if you're not evolving quickly, you can become extinct in 6 months. Like that's how quick things move. And, making sure you're always staying ahead of that, that to me has been one of the reasons why we've been able to survive for this long.
Yeah. So another perfect segue. What's which this is really a throwaway question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the biggest mistake most businesses are making right now?
So I think probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see businesses making right now is really kind of not adapting. And it goes back to, some of the conversations we've had today. I see people that have just kind of put their foot in the ground and said, hey, we're not going to really embrace AI. We're not going to change things. We're going to keep things the way they are. Our business has been successful for a really long time. We're not going to kind of evolve. And I think that to me right now is one of the biggest mistakes that I see businesses making. And typically these are businesses that have had a long standing success. They've done really well. And they're somewhat set in their ways and they're basically not willing to kind of face the reality. And what's it's kind of that old adage, right? You can't see the forest from the trees, right? Because you're in it, you're in it so much, you don't really see what's going on that outside. And frankly, you've been insulated from that. Your business has been so successful, you really have never had to look outside your network at what's kind of going on. And to me, that's probably one of the biggest things that I see right now are some very, very successful businesses that have done very well are just kind of unwilling to embrace some of the things that are really at the forefront of what's going on. And I see in real time companies that are more agile and, maybe you've, been in business for a much shorter period of time, but are embracing some of those technologies, are gaining on some of these bigger companies very, very quickly. And a lot of it just really comes with that ability to be able to understand and, sort of read the room and make changes that are going to help your business really thrive moving forward.
Yeah, I mean that connects to something that I've just recently started talking about, being season 3 of the podcast. But it's going to come to the forefront here in the next couple weeks of shows, and it's something that I just call it like the human and machine equation, right? The machine side is what we've been describing, right? Using AI, digital infrastructure to optimize how you show up, how you operate, how you scale. But the human side, the culture, the purpose, the people actually executing, I think that as well is what most businesses neglect. Do you see a pattern like that in your client base as well, or not so much?
For sure. I think that a lot of times, people don't, places don't place enough emphasis on the people and the teams, and they get kind of drawn into other aspects. And I think that those are all kind of mistakes that businesses tend to make over time. And look, I mean, for me, one of the biggest things that when we were kind of growing very quickly and got to kind of the high volume of employees that we had, I remember one day we would do some like like little things. We do like pizza on Wednesdays or whatever. This is pre-COVID, right? So everybody was in the office all the time, and I remember talking to everybody and going around. I would try to talk to everybody as much as I could, and I was like, wow, like there's a good amount of people here that I don't really even like know. Like
Yeah.
I know their name a little bit and I know what they do here, but I don't really like I've never really had a conversation with them, And I thought to myself, well, how are they gonna really buy into whatever culture I try to have when they have zero connection to me? And I did my best to really try to improve that. Like that was something that I put on myself that I said, hey, I need to get out of, my office doing whatever I'm working on, and I need to spend more time trying to make sure that people know who I am, know they can come to me, and that our culture is one here that you're supported. We want you here, we care about our people, and I think that was one of those moments for me that I realized, hey, I have to shift and prioritize some of the things that I'm doing to be able to make sure that I'm really promoting what and doing what I'm promoting, that I really am connected with our team.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons that statement is one of the reasons when I reached out to you a couple weeks ago, kind of talking about what the Dream Manager program is. It's just because you're the type of person that's going to listen to it and, not just poo poo it away, right? Like I talk to God knows how many people I talk to, but 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, we're not dealing with that. Like that's fluff, that's soft stuff. And, it really couldn't be any further from the truth. Like I do get where they're coming from, because 5 years ago, I probably would have answered the same way. So, you know, what goes around comes around, I guess. So 25 years from now, AI has reshaped the economy in ways I don't even think we can fully predict yet. What does the role of a digital agency look like, or do they even still exist?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'm an advocate for I think that one of the things that I always kind of stress is that there's always going to need to be people that oversee that AI. In my opinion,
Yeah, I agree.
AI is never going to be able to make some of the decisions that as humans we can make. It can do some of the task work much faster than we ever could. It can do certain things that way quicker than any human ever could. But there's a certain level of, just real world and real life experience that I don't personally don't think that that will ever be able to be replicated. So I think that the way that different businesses and companies will really operate will have a lot more, will have a lot more input and a lot more utilization of AI. But I also think at the same time, how it's being managed by people will be a big driver of that. And I also think one thing that I already kind of see some of this, and that's, there's some fatigue around AI already. People, they want to see genuine content. They want conversations like we're having. They don't want some avatar of you and I having some AI driven conversation. They want to hear real things. So I feel like as much as technology is advanced, at the same time, there's this level of desire for authenticity and genuineness. And I think over time, where I think kind of that middle ground is going to be is, businesses are going to, utilize, real people to do a lot of these roles that connect with their, with their clients. And a lot of that more task work will be done by, AI or whatever we're calling it in 25 years. So as
Yeah.
much as, I feel the workforce will evolve, I think, it's a great example for, for a lot of what, you kind of have done, as hey, I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to use it to my advantage. And I think that that's how I see things really moving forward, and, where we'll be in 25 years. I still think that I'm not someone who believes that humans won't be doing any work in 25 years. I believe humans will have resource and tools at their
That
utilization.
we didn't.
Right. That we did. That will make them better, but I don't think that, no, I don't think that we will be, completely unutilized in 25 years.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I was talking to my EOS implementer over the weekend, I guess, and I was just talking to him about some of the things that I got going on, and he's like, man, you are 2 years ahead of where mostly everybody else is. He's like, for an old guy, not too bad. He's a young guy. Like he's like, for an old guy, it's not too bad. So, you know, it was nice to hear, but I think it's inevitable, right? I mean, it's coming. The tools just keep getting better. I go back to things like our fathers told us, like work smarter, not harder. Like
Yep.
that's what all these tools are. Like
Yep.
it gives us the ability to work more efficiently and um work on value added stuff, whether that be revenue generation, customer facing activities, like whatever. You're not sitting there doing the same manual thing over and over again. So
It's true.
yeah, let's pull the curtain back a bit,
Okay.
because what I know about Ken and what I've seen firsthand is that, building wealth was never really the point, right? It was a nice byproduct, but things like the Toros jerseys, your investment in Camden, your pro bono work, where does that come from for you or in you? Like what drives you to be so giving?
Well, thank you. I think that one of the things that I've always kind of try to look at is that, in every situation, if you've been fortunate enough, and I feel that along the way, yes, there's been hard work, no doubt about it. And, I've definitely put in time and made sacrifices to get ahead. But without a doubt, man, I've definitely had some luck that's helped me. Things I could have went left or right. I went right. That was the right way. There's been a lot of times that I feel like I've been fortunate that, things went the way that, they might not have gone. And, being able to do some of these things along the way that, can kind of help and impact somebody and have some positivity out there beyond kind of just the day to day. My wife and I have always tried to take part of that. And, certainly there's people out there that are, far bigger donors and do a lot more on
Sure.
philanthropy. But
Scale.
Yeah, I've always tried to do things that I felt like connected with. Things like the jerseys, you can see that and you can see the impact that it has. And, being able to do some of these things where you can actually feel like, hey, that's been, a positive. That's something that, really made for that situation to be better. Something that I feel goes a long way, and I feel like hey, trying to do things like that, it kind of plays into to hopefully some of the good value that you can get out of things. So I've always tried to do some of those things, and kind of utilize the fact that I feel that luck has played a part in my success to be able to do some good with that.
Right. Right on. So I'm going to ask you something that I ask all my guests, but maybe with a little different slant. But what's the dream that Ken is still building? Has nothing to do with WebiMax, but you, Ken the person. Like what is unfinished work for you, and what is like on your bucket list to still be done?
Sure. I'd say that my wife and I just had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago. Over the course of the last 25 years, building the businesses. When you run businesses, you're never really off, right? You're always the one that's on. And you're always the one. Again, I told a story one time about having to take an important business call, a sales call, like basically at the base of the castle in Walt Disney World, and it's like to me that's just part of what we do. Like if I'm not taking that call and I'm not closing a business, we're not able to go to Disney
Yeah,
World.
we're not at
So it's
Disney
like,
World.
yeah,
We're
so
in
like
Wally World.
yeah, like you've got to be able to do both. But I think one of the things that for me is really being able to you know take maybe some of the trips that we weren't able to do because there were meetings and things like that. And so if I have a bucket list, it's probably trying to make sure that some of these things I can do with my family while I'm still still healthy and able to. But I think that basically along the way, it does, being an entrepreneur is a commitment. And I think a lot of people see they see you at Disney World and they think, oh, well, that they were able to do that because they're a business owner. But they don't, it doesn't track back to them when you're taking the call there, trying to close a deal, and you're supposed to be getting on your ride in a minute. So I mean, it's like, all those things are kind of just part of what I think it takes to be successful. And,
Yeah.
hopefully I can, spend a little bit more time, with my family here moving forward and maybe take some of those trips that we were never able to.
Right on. I mean, we go to Ireland next Wednesday. Never been, believe it or not, and neither of my parents ever made it there. So I'm bringing some ashes with me.
All right. All right.
I gotta stuff them in my suitcase
Yeah, yeah,
because they'll look at it as contraband, I'm sure.
for sure.
So this show is built on one premise, and that's that organizations that invest in their people's dreams get a return that no algorithm can replicate, right? It's the human return on investment.
Sure.
From what I see, you guys live that, right?
We try to. I mean, that's been, we try our best. I mean, even sometimes along the way, right? In business, you got to make some hard decisions. You've got to part ways with some people, and do some things that are you don't want to do, but you have to do, right? And recently, someone that 20 years ago they were just coming out of college. They had a lot of potential, but they weren't they just weren't focused enough. And we that kind of led to us having to part ways. And I gave, what I thought was good opinion to them at the time and said, you have the ability, you have to make the commitment to realize the potential that you have. And if you do, you're going to be very successful. And didn't see that person for a long time. we reconnected, and they went on to be very, very successful. And they believe it or not, I mean, they actually were thankful for me, kind of pulling them aside and doing that, because it really put them on a track that they realized that, just because they had this potential and they had this talent, like, you couldn't just not be
Still got to
focused
do
and
it.
get things done. Like, people at businesses, they can't keep you there on the promise of talent. You have to deliver. And I was really proud to see how that message impacted him in this particular case, and he put his talent to good work, and has been very, very successful.
Awesome. I'm going to take a minute here and be transparent with the listeners because, again, this model's exactly what the show is about, just from a different angle. Ken has offered to help me get some of these businesses that I got going on off the ground. And he's offered to do it pro bono, right? And that's not like, I was genuinely floored when you called me with that. Right? I mean, here's the CEO of a nationally recognized digital agency, saying to me, "Hey man, I see what you're building and I want to help." Why? Like, what is it? What is it that you see?
I mean, what I see is I see the drive. I see, you out there, working hard to try to, move things forward. And that, to me, I feel is something that, I connect with, and I look at a lot of different things. And sometimes, like, for example, I am not handy. I can't fix anything, like, literally nothing. I
Me
mean,
either.
putting in a light bulb is like probably the tops of what I can do. And I'd say I'm 50-50 on getting that right. But, when it comes to some of the things that, I look at and see, and I know I can impact, I look at someone like you and say, hey, I'd like to try to give you, some insight and some things that could really help you from just what I've learned, things I've learned, and maybe steer you in the right direction. Because I think sometimes one of the things people also don't realize is being an entrepreneur at times can be, kind of a lonely scenario, right? People that
Mm-hmm.
want to help you, are they trying to help you, or are they trying to leverage you, right? Are they trying to say, oh
Right.
yeah, hey, I'm going to come and help you for 60% of your business, or I'm going to come help you for this? There's very few times that you really find genuinely people that say, hey, I've been down the road that you've been down. I've done that grind. Hey, here's a few things that I found that helped me. Here's some things that could help you. Hey, here's some pitfalls to avoid. And I just think, from my perspective, being able to, I genuinely, love dealing with businesses. I love business. It's something that, I feel like, I'm the type of guy who drives by a store that's vacant, and I think, what store would be successful there? What type of business
Yeah.
would be successful there? So
Wawa.
always, always thinking, and just wanted to kind of, hey, like I said, it's, I feel like situations like that, when I can help someone or something that, I genuinely enjoy doing. And yeah, I wanted to try to impart some of my,
Wisdom.
I
My
guess you could call
wisdom.
it wisdom, but a lot of it
Yeah.
is mistakes that I made
Yeah.
that
Don't fall in the same hole.
I could tell you, don't make this dumb mistake that I made, because I made that mistake you could avoid it. And
Yeah.
tough. And along the way, hey, being upfront, it was tough to find people like that. I found a lot more people that were interested in trying to leverage me than help me.
Right. So through the digital marketing lens, right? When you hear about a consulting brand, like I'll say it's a brand, um, right? You're talking about Trinity One have built an application that helps track the Dream Manager program and clientele, SaaS platform, podcast, all orbiting around one core idea. What do you immediately think about that? Like, how does that hit you? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it, yeah, I don't know. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are, really what I see for you is really being able to just expand your reach, right? Like I think I'm, because, we know each other, I'm more engaged in your content and some of the things that you're doing. And I think sometimes one of the things that I always look at is, well, how do you expand your reach? How do you expand your voice? So more people are able to kind of take hold in some of these things that you're doing, and I think that that's one of the things that I saw that I can help. And I think I kind of buy into a lot of what you talk about and the different aspects around the things that you're promoting. And I think sometimes what I always look at is it's just a matter of people say, well, what separates this person from that person? They have similar content. It's just reach. It's just the difference in
Yeah.
people being able to hear that message. And that's where I really thought that I could help you was, hey, how do we take your message and get more people to hear it? Once more people hear it, you're already doing the work. You've already created something that people are interested in. We just need more people to be interested in it. And I think you look at the kind of the timeline of some of these people that have built some of these businesses that are really built around themselves and the things that they've done. And they all say like, hey, I was telling the same story and had the same messages 5 years ago and nobody was listening. And now suddenly I've gotten this audience and everybody says you're a genius. It's just a matter of being able to amplify that message and get more people tuned into it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. So again, coming back to the intersection, I keep coming back to like what you do, helping organizations to be found. Like, right, you just said this, like in reference to what I'm doing, which by the way, I am legally bound to say that the Dream Manager program is not my idea, right? It was a gentleman named Matthew Kelly's idea. I'm just one of his students that takes his concept of investing in your employees and team members in the workplace. So let me get that out of the way. So, but what you do with helping organizations be found, be trusted, be chosen online, right? That's the
Yeah.
machine side of things.
Yep.
What I'm doing is or what I'm working to do, I should say, is helping organizations build a culture where people are fully alive, fully invested, not miserable at work, right? Not worried about whatever's happening outside of the, that building. Um, that's the human side. So together, right? That's the whole equation.
Yeah.
So So, rapid fire, quick answers. You
Sure.
ready?
Do it.
Best business advice you ever got in one sentence.
Best business advice I ever got was from my dad, and it was basically just how to figure out profit and loss. You buy something or it costs you this, you sell it for this. That's how you make money, margin.
Fair. Worst digital marketing mistake you see businesses making over and over again.
When they switch, websites, they don't keep some of the same URLs and things that were with their sites for a long time, and they lose
Oh,
rankings, they lose a lot
yeah.
of the value that they had. And it's because a lot of times they're just focused solely on the aesthetics of the site. But I always look at really kind of the core of what the site has. So that's a mistake we see, 2-3 times a week.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll kill a brand.
Yes.
So if WebiMax could only offer one service out of all the services that you offer, which would it be?
Um, if it was only one, lead generation. I think lead generation is recession proof. Businesses are always looking for more leads, and that's been my thing, man. 25 years, it's really been, a lot of it is just really revolves around, businesses getting more leads to be able to fuel their sales teams has been the core of what's really, been, my businesses.
Yeah. Final one. If you could go back and tell 25-year-old Ken one thing, what is it?
I would probably tell him to, probably take things a little bit slower at times and think through some decisions. I think like a lot of people, we get caught up in the moment. We make some decisions hastily. And sometimes when you make those decisions hastily, you can make them in a minute, but it can take you a year to unwind it. So I think
Mm,
when you look at it from that perspective, as I've gotten older, I definitely have taken more time to make decisions. In business, you need to be decisive. You need to make decisions. You need to know that if you make a lot of decisions, there are going to be ones that don't work out. But nowadays, I feel like the decisions I make are well thought out and, are ones that I know I feel I've made the best educated decision on. Right or wrong, I've done the work. So, yeah, not to be impulsive would
yeah,
be probably the best advice I could give a 25-year-old
I'm
Ken.
very impulsive right now. Well, Ken, this has been exactly the type of conversation that this show is built for. You're a person who built something extraordinary, give generously, and is still hungry for what's next. Right? That's what I call like a dream architect, right? Somebody who's always chasing. So genuinely, I'm grateful for your time, your generosity, your friendship, and for believing in what we're trying to build over here.
Well, thank you. The feeling's mutual, and I look at all the things that you're doing and a lot of the things that you've accomplished, and I look at what probably we'll be talking about a year from now, how much further you're going to be able to be with everything. So, I feel the same way. So I'm very appreciative to have the time that you took with me today and talk to me and allowed to talk to about my experiences and hopefully some people out there that listen can relate to some of the things and know that along the way there's going to be tough times, there's going to be times where you question your decisions, but you've got to be willing to make those sacrifices and you got to be willing to continue to push forward and if you want to get to where you really want to get to, and being able to do these things to me has always been not so much necessarily about just money. It's been about building security, right? Being able to build your own path, and you can never really stop that once you start it. And so that's
Yeah.
that's where I am today.
Yeah. One of the pillars of the program, the Dream Manager program, is like, right, like your character and your legacy. And that's what I hear you saying. Um, Well, for everyone listening, if your business needs to be found, needs to be trusted for sure, and needs to compete in an AI shaped world, go find Ken and the team at WebiMax. That's at webimax.com. And if you want to learn how the Dream Manager methodology can transform your organization, head over to trinityoneconsulting.com and I'd be happy to talk you through it. As always, I'm Kevin Patrick. This has been the Dream Dividend. Go build something.